a PhD student at University of Coimbra in Portugal, but also collaborating with the British Antarctic Survey at Cambridge in the United Kingdom. So what I do is basically I'm studying emperor penguins' diet. And what I'm trying to do with my PhD project is trying to basically using satellite imagery to understand and to know their diet. How? So when we can clearly see the colonies of emperor penguins through satellite imagery, because as they breed on sea ice, we can clearly see the contrast between the poo and the white from the ice. So by that, with the satellite imagery, we can see where they are and know their population numbers. But for my PhD project, I want to know the diet, as I was saying. So the interesting and funny part here is that the poo has different colors. So we think that the colors are a reflection of their diet. So for instance, the emperor penguin forage on krill, on squid, on fish, different fish species. So when they forage more on krill, the poo, the guano, is more orange. They have more, the guano has a orange color. And we can clearly see that from satellite imagery. And instead, when they forage more on fish, the poo is more, let's say, brownish or grayish color. So we think that the colors of the poo of the guano of the emperor penguins can be a reflection of their diets. So if that is true, basically I'm in a way that to create a methodology that could lead us to use only satellite imagery. I'm talking about satellite imagery that are free available. It's commercial one, and everyone can use it and can see it. So using that free available tools, I could create, or my plan is to create this methodology that could lead us to the diet of emperor penguins through all Antarctica on the South Pole without being there, because that's the one of the tricky parts of doing research in both poles in the Arctic and Antarctic is to go there. It's expensive, it's hard, so there is some logistics problems. So having this, and in this kind of this species of emperor penguin, they are really tricky to see and to reach out, because as I was saying, they have their habitats on sea ice, and to have access to these kind of colonies is really hard. So knowing what they are eating is essential to a species, right? So when for a species to survive, they need a place to reproduce for their reproduction cycle. They need a place to forage, to eat. So knowing what they are eating is essential to know what is the cycle of emperor penguin, because we want to protect him. That's also an important part of my project, is to help in a way that we need to know more about this species to understand how can we protect him, because the emperor penguin has also something very, very strong in them, because they are like a sentinel from climate change. So as they breed on sea ice, as they use the ice as a platform to breed, to heat, to forage, basically we can see how the emperor penguin is doing is the same, basically seeing how the sea ice around Antarctica is doing. So we can use the emperor penguin as a, let's say, like a flag to know how the ecosystem on Antarctica is doing. So basically my plan is try to fill this gap about their diet. I also had some interest in, let's say, in pollution too. I had some works with microplastic pollution on South Pole. And also I had some work with squids and cephalopods around Antarctica too, and even with some projects going on in the Arctic about this type of organisms. My first time experience with the polar science started back in 2017 when I started my master's. But my first true experiencing the polar science in the fieldwork with my hands were just a couple of months ago. So it was in November 2023. So that was my first experience on a cold place like Antarctica, and it was it was amazing. So the goal of this trip that I had was for my PhD, as I want to use satellite imagery to as a methodology to understand if we can say what the emperor penguins are eating from space. Um, we want to understand if the colors from the images are a reflection from that diet. But to know, ensure that the colors are a reflection of some specific prey items, we need to know if that color, specific color, the orange, for instance, represents shrimp, like the krill. But to know that, we need to go to the field, to Antarctica, to collect some samples, and in this case, specific case, to know if that guano, that poo, that color on that sample represents that prey item. So my goal with this trip was to go there to collect some samples on an emperor penguin colony, and afterwards I'm going to do some DNA analysis on that sample, and likely I'm going to know what are the prey items that are on the sample, and with that I could know that what are the prey items they are eating, what the color they represent, and with that I could match these three different dimensions. So basically I could match the DNA with on the sample with the color on the field, and also these both with the satellite imagery colors that I can find on the satellite imagery itself. So the goal of this trip was to collect these samples to do some DNA analysis and to match the DNA with the color on the fieldwork with the color on the satellite imagery. So that was the goal of this trip. You only went there to collect some poo, and no, that wasn't the case. So that was the part of my PhD, but I was also in other two different science goals on this cruise. So basically, the other two was to put some tracking devices on the emperor penguins to know where they are, what places they use to eat and forage, and with that we could like overlap with my guano samples, because knowing where they are eating, maybe we can know what they are eating, and also with the DNA we can match this. We are also using the satellite imagery to count the emperor penguins. But the resolution of a satellite imagery is lower than the resolution of an aerial photograph or aerial video. So, but to know that for sure, we need to compare both and see if there are a big difference or not, or even we can use it as a calibration method to for the satellite imagery itself, because it's easier, as I was saying, it's easier to use satellite imagery instead of using or to go there and collect every place, collect some drone images. So this kind of work was more to calibrate the image itself with the satellite imagery, because the most of my job in the team that I'm with is using satellite imagery to collect some new ecological data, and we can, as I was saying, collect some population numbers, some diet numbers. So that was the big picture of and the goal of this trip. So how was my trip? 2 months already passed, and it's like that was some distant um dream itself, because it was such a over-stimulating experience. I can say that was the best experience of my life so far, seeing firsthand these incredible animals, because as I was saying, it's really hard to reach out to these places, to an emperor penguin colony. So having this opportunity and seeing for in the first hand the emperor penguin was like a mind-blowing moment because they are really big animals. They are like the size of a toddler, like 1.20 meters size, and they are very curious about everything. Like when we were reaching out the colony, we need to walk through the ice for some kilometers. Um, when we arrived, it was so fantastic to listen all those sounds of the penguin. The experience was so good and so amazing to see these animals for the first time. And I think the only thing comparable, it's like I was like in a BBC documentary or a National Geographic thing going, and I was like, wow, it was so bright and white in every direction that I was um uh, my point of view when that I was looking and seeing all these animals like just being there and them on their bellies or even like just being there was just I don't have any specific words that could explain what I felt because as I was saying it was such an overstimulating experience that I think I can't express it in words. Being a polar science communicator, I I try to be one because I don't know what is a polar science communicator, but for me, in my opinion, as I'm from Portugal, I'm from a country that are really far away from the Arctic and from Antarctica. mm, I think it's even in that type of country that when we are very far away, it's really important to communicate polar science because most of the people don't pay attention to things that are not, let's say, in front of their eyes. So when we are talking about climate change, we know that the climate change is something that affects really affects the polar regions, and that could affect us in the future because um, as I was saying, Portugal is very far away, but it's a coast country. So we have a lot of our coast. We have a lot of coast. So in the future, with the climate change, with the rising of the waters, that could affect us. So it is important for us in Portugal to have in mind that this is a problem, even if it is far away. It could be very close to us. So being a polar science communicator here, I think it's even more important because we need to to inform people about this kind of problems, to inform people that this could be a problem in the future, and that future is not very far away too. It's very close to us. So being a polar science communicator for me is going on that way to inform people, to educate people about the polar regions, to go to schools to talk with kids and try to teach them how is important the polar regions, why the polar regions have a major impact on our daily life. Like I try to explain to them how, like, let's say in our when we are hot, basically we can use the HACs to decrease the temperature or increase the temperature. And I try to explain like the polar regions work like our HACs, our natural ACs. So basically they try to decrease the temperature on our planet. So these kind of things that it's important. I feel it's important to educate the people. And my approach to the polarized communication is more on the bottom up approach. So I try to focus more on the young generations, on the kids, how how it is important for them to know about the polar regions and why the sea ice is important, why the ice is important, why we need to know more about these regions, and why it is important for Portugal too. Everything is connected, every ecosystem is connected, and even if these regions are very, very far away from Portugal, we are affecting them. Like, even for instance, like usually the kids, I try to explain about, for instance, about the pollution, they usually, or let's say that, okay, I will just put this napkin on the ground and that's it. And I'm not going to talk or think that that napkin is going to end on the ocean. But that's true. That napkin can blow away. It can go to the sea, and it can maybe go on the currents, and even the currents, every ocean is linked. So through the currents, it can arrive on Antarctica, on the Southern Ocean, or even in the Arctic Ocean. So trying to get their attention there and activate their conscience about the polar regions, about the why it is a problem, what is the climate change, and why or how this is affecting the polar regions, and how we can stop this and how can we help them, is my way of approaching the polar science communication part. But as I was saying, I have more focus on the young generations, because that's the part that I really love to do, is go to schools and speak with the kids. And even for us, maybe for me, it could be something that, okay, it's just a talk. But I know that for the kids, or for some of the kids that they are there, it is not just a talk. It could be more than just a talk. It could be something that could link their spark for the better, for to know more, to want to know more about these places, and maybe to change their way of thinking about the world itself and how we need to protect them. So that's my approach to the polar science communication right now. I really do love communicate my science and what I do with my findings and research, but I also do love to teach the kids about the polar science and why the polar regions are important. And even in the educational part of the teachers, because we have a lot of teachers that are doing this with us with about the polar weeks. So basically the polar weeks, just a small context here, like the polar weeks are they happen worldwide, but in Portugal they happen like twice a year. So it's during times that polar scientists go to schools and speak with the kids about polar science. And this project is going on for more than 10 years. We have teachers and professors and educators that are on this since the beginning. So having teachers that are teaching or in these initiatives for the last 10 years. So we are talking about kids that were like listening about polar science when they were in the first grade or in the second grade, and now they are entering the uni, and they remember why a polar bear don't hit a penguin. They remember why the climate change, or how the climate change is affecting these areas. And so it's really revigorating and motivates, or for me, it motivates me to continue to on this path. Yeah, when I'm doing so most of my research is just on Antarctica. So, but during my talks, during my communication, let's say my how I do my polar science communication, I also pay attention to the Arctic, how climate change is affecting the Arctic, how the Arctic was important even for the Portuguese, and I try to explain the difference between the Arctic and the Antarctic. I'm talking about the geographical, the geopolitical ones, the indigenous part that they like, for instance, that the Antarctic don't have indigenous people and the Arctic have indigenous people. So basically, those kind of key aspects about Arctic and Antarctica, I speak about everything about Arctic too in that sense.